You know this story. The grandfather, the patriarch, the immovable pillar of the Kuru dynasty, the man who made the most terrible vow in the history of Indian mythology that he would never marry, never father children, never claim the throne that was rightfully his, so that his aging father could marry a woman he loved, and then lived with that vow for over a century, watching everything he sacrificed it for turn to ash. Bhishma, born Devavrata, the greatest warrior of his age, the man who could choose the moment of his own death. You know it like this. Bhishma was the son of King Shantanu and the goddess Ganga. He gave up his birthright for his father's happiness. He trained under Parashurama himself, the greatest warrior teacher who ever lived. He was the guardian of the Kuru dynasty through 6 generations, the thread that held everything together, the man every side in the Mahabharata. War respected even while fighting against him. He lay on a bed of arrows after the war, refusing to die until the auspicious moment, and spent his last days giving the Pandavas the wisdom of an entire life, a great man, a noble sacrifice, a life of honor. Now let me tell you what the Mahabharata's full text actually shows about what Bhishma did, and more devastatingly, what he chose not to do. Because Bhishma's tragedy is not his vow. His tragedy is everything he watched happen because of it. The version of Bhishma most people carry is built on his vow, the Bhishma Pratijya, the terrible oath. He gave up the throne, he gave up marriage, he gave up fatherhood, he gave up the entire future that was his by birth. He did this for love, for his father's love, for Satyavati's father who demanded these terms before allowing the marriage. This is presented as nobility, as the ultimate sacrifice, as the act that made him Bhishma, the one who has taken a terrible vow, rather than Devavrata, the one he was born as. But here is what is strange. Bhishma did not make this vow for the kingdom. He did not make it for Dharma. He made it for his father's desire. His father Shantanu, a king, a man responsible for millions of people, wanted to marry a fisherman's daughter. The fisherman set conditions Shantanu could not meet on his own, and rather than telling his father that personal desire cannot override the needs of a dynasty, rather than accepting that some things cannot be had, Devavrata sacrificed everything to make his father's wish possible. The vow was not an act of dharma. It was an act of love disguised as duty. And the Mahabharata across 140,000 verses shows exactly what that love cost, not Bhishma, everyone else. Because Bhishma renounced the throne, the Kuru dynasty had no natural heir. Satyavati's sons, the ones the sacrifice was made for, both died young without heirs of their own. The dynasty lurched into crisis. Satyavati summoned Vyasa, her son, from before her marriage to father children on her daughters-in-law through Niyoga. From this came Dhritarashtra, born blind, and Pandu, and Vidura. Dhritarashtra, because of his blindness, was passed over for the throne despite being the eldest. This single fact, the blind king denied what was his, is the seed of every injustice in the Mahabharata. Duryodhana's jealousy, the dice game, Draupadi's humiliation, the exile, the war, 18 million dead. Every single one of these flows directly from the succession crisis created by Bhishma's vow. Bhishma knew this. He watched it happen across generations. He was present at every catastrophe. He sat in the court when Draupadi was dragged in. He watched the dice game. He saw Duryodhana refuse every offer of peace. And he sat in his chair. Every time. Let us talk about the dice game, because this is where Bhishma's tragedy becomes impossible to excuse. When Draupadi was dragged into the court by her hair, when she asked her legal question, the one no one could answer, when Dushasana began to disrobe her in front of hundreds of warriors, priests, and nobles, Bhishma was there. He was the most powerful person in that room, not the most powerful warrior, though he was that too, the most powerful morally, the most respected, the one figure whose word carried more weight than any king's command. If Bhishma had stood up in that moment and said stop, it would have stopped. He did not stand up. His explanation, given later, was that he was bound by his loyalty to whoever held the Kuru throne. Dhritarashtra was king. To act against the king's court would be to violate his vow of service to the dynasty. The man who gave up everything for a vow used another vow to justify watching a woman be destroyed in a royal court. Draupadi asked him directly. She stood in that court, disheveled and publicly humiliated, and looked at Bhishma, the grandfather, the protector, the man who had lived a century of Dharma, and asked him whether what was happening was right. Bhishma said he could not answer, that the matter of Dharma was too complex, that he was unable to give a clear verdict. The wisest man in the room said the situation was too complicated to judge. It was not complicated. It was just inconvenient. Here is what the Mahabharata's full text reveals about Bhishma when you remove the reverence. He was a man of extraordinary ability and deeply ordinary moral courage. His physical courage was beyond question. He fought armies alone. He defeated Parashurama, his own teacher, in single combat that lasted 23 days. He was the first to fall in the Mahabharata war, and he fell only because he allowed himself to fall, choosing the moment of his own departure with the precision only available to someone who controls his own death. But moral courage is different from physical courage. Moral courage is standing up in a room full of people you respect and saying this is wrong. Bhishma never did this, not once in the entire text, not for Amba, whom he abducted for a prince and then refused to marry himself, leaving her with no path in the world, not for Draupadi in the court, not for the Pandavas during their exile, not when every peace mission failed and the war became inevitable. He gave advice when asked, he expressed private reservations, he made his discomfort quietly known. And then he did what the institution required. The Mahabharata has a word for this. It calls it institutional dharma, the dharma of maintaining your role, your position, your oath. Bhishma elevated institutional dharma above every other consideration. Even when the institution was burning, even when the people inside it were screaming. After the war ended, after 18 million people died, after the Pandavas won and found they could not live with what winning meant, Bhishma lay on his bed of arrows on the battlefield. He had been struck down by Arjuna's arrows in the 10th day of the war, but he chose not to die. He lay on a bed made of the arrows that pierced him, head slightly raised, waiting for the auspicious moment to Uttarayanna, the northward journey of the sun, to depart. He lay there for 58 days. During those 58 days, every king, sage, and warrior who had survived the war came to sit at his feet, and Bhishma spoke. He gave the Shanti Parva and the Anchasana Parva, two of the longest sections of the Mahabharata, answering every question about dharma, governance, ethics, and the nature of existence that Yudhishthira brought to him. He was magnificent. He was exhaustive. He was the repository of everything a civilization had learned about how to live. And Yudhishthira, listening to all of it, finally asked the question that nobody else dared ask. He asked, if you knew all of this, if you have always known all of this, why did you not act on it when it mattered? Bhishma's answer was the most honest thing he ever said. He said, I was maintained by the Kauravas' food. A man's wisdom is corrupted by the salt he eats. I could not see clearly because I was eating at the wrong table. 100 years of wisdom, a lifetime of dharma. And his final explanation was that he could not act rightly because of whose food he ate. Not a vow, not fate, not divine will. Salt. The story of Bhishma has been told for 3,000 years as the story of the perfect sacrifice, the man who gave everything for those he loved, the grandfather who held a dynasty together through sheer force of will and honor. All of this is true, and it is not the whole truth. The Mahabharata's Bhishma is the most precise portrait of a very specific kind of failure, the failure of people who are wise enough to know what is right and too institutionally bound to do it, who express their discomfort in private and their compliance in public, who have given so much to a system that they cannot afford to see the system clearly. There is a reason this resonates so deeply right now. Every institution in the world has a Bhishma, the person who has been there longest, who knows where all the bodies are buried, who will tell you privately what they really think and publicly say something else entirely, who have eaten so much of the wrong table's food that they no longer notice the taste. The Mahabharata does not condemn Bhishma, it mourns him, because his failure is not the failure of a villain. It is the failure of a good man who loved his chains and called them duty. He lay on a bed of arrows for 58 days, giving the world all the wisdom he had never used when it would have mattered. And the arrows held him up, the way duty had held him up his entire life. Upright, immovable, pierced through. Script by Grey Wall Stories. Every wall holds a story. Some walls were built by men who knew better and stayed silent anyway.